Again, this one they still want you to write an equation, right, in standard form, and they want it to be a linear equation in standard form. But with this information, well, we already know that if you have a point and a slope, you can use this formula, right? Because it's called point slope formula. You can place your point right here. There's your x1, y1. And you can place your slope right there, correct? Well, it just happens that your slope is supposed to be something that's parallel to this. And so therefore, parallel means that you're going to be using the same slope. So I already know this is going to have to be 3/2. Now the x and the minus is always there. The y and the minus is always there. Well, guess what? This is your x1 and your y1 because that comes from the first point. So I'm going to put -5 right here because that comes from your y1. And I'm going to put -5 over here because that comes from your x1 right there. Oops, should do a different color, right? Alright, I see double negative, so I'm just going to change it to a plus. Here's another double negative, change to a plus. And now I'm ready to multiply. Well, that shouldn't be too bad. The first one is always the fraction next to the x. The next one, you can just put a 1 under it and say 15 right on top. And the 2 on the bottom. And then you always bring this number across over here. So the inverse of +5 would be -5, and I would put it over here on top. I like to put that number over 1, and I can see my common denominator should be a 2. So that means I need to multiply this by 2, multiply this one by 2. And then all of this part right here is actually positive 15 over 2 minus 10 over 2. The 10 comes from the 5 times 2, and the 2 comes from the 1 times 2. So positive 15 and negative 10 gives me positive 5, and my denominator, or my common denominator, is a 2. So in other words, here you have your y, here you have your 3/2 x, and this whole section becomes plus 5 over 2. But then you have to consider that you want the standard form. So that means I'm going to have to move this 3x over here so it becomes -3/2 x, and then plus the y. So I'm going to have -3/2 x plus the y, and then this guy moves, and then I have 5/2 over here, which is cool. I mean, they have the a cannot be negative, so I'm going to do the cambio al mundo. Everything gets multiplied by -1. So basically just change the signs. And we cannot divide by 2, so I'm going to multiply everything. We can't have any fractions. So I'm dividing by 2 on both terms there. So I'm going to multiply by 2. On the first one, you actually have 2 times 3 divided by 2. So you can see how the 2's cancel there, leaving you just the 3x. On the second one, it's just 2y. And on the third one, it's actually 2 times -5, right? 2 times -5 all over 2. So what happens to the 2 2's? They cancel out. And you stay with the -5. And you're pretty much done. That's it.